You're listening to Not Another Depressed Teen, your guide to mental health in teens by teens, for parents and kids. From learning effective communication to finding the right resources to help your child prosper, our podcast has all the tools you need to gain insight on how to improve your mental health and your child. Stay tuned to learn more.
Hi, I'm Pranjal.
And I'm Aanya.
And today we'll be discussing ADHD with Ms. Faitel, a psychology teacher at Irvington High School. Ms. Faitel did not only research ADHD in college, but she also has ADHD and her daughter has it, which means that she can explain the disorder from many different point of views, like as a parent, as a teacher, from a personal point of view. So we are very grateful to have Ms. Faitel here.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome.
In simple terms, how would you describe ADHD?
Well, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, but what it basically comes down to is the inability to focus and also this restless energy, not seen in every person with the diagnosis of ADHD, but in general, there's this tendency to act impulsively and be really easily distracted. So this high distractibility tends to be seen in there's like unfinished projects because one task will be started and then the person will think of something else that maybe they need to do or something catches their eye and then they never go back and finish the first task. They might be on 4 different tasks and never finish any of them, or items might be lost just because they misplaced them and then again they're distracted and don't go back to fetch their items. So there's a lot of kind of tendencies seen in people who have ADHD.
Yeah, and I like your point about how it's kind of different for everyone. I think a lot of times we think ADHD is, we imagine a boy in the classroom and he's like jittering around in his seat and stuff. That can be ADHD, but that's not always ADHD.
Excellent point, exactly. I think so. The bit of research I've done suggests that in girls, ADHD tends to show itself more in inattentiveness, kind of daydreaming, or just kind of losing focus. So it's just very hard. Maybe the teacher might be talking about a task and they're trying to focus, but their mind just sort of wanders and they're not doing it on purpose. It's just that, again, that's still ADHD, that kind of daydreaming or inability to focus is just as much a part of the disorder as someone who is restlessly, bouncing up and down in their chair or can't stop shaking their leg, or, they're all part of the same disorder.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be really hard to spot, to see, to diagnose a girl who has ADHD. Do you think that accounts for how there's a lot more people who are guys that are diagnosed?
I think that's an excellent point. I think that if you're especially a teacher with a class of over maybe 24 students, if, you have students who are quiet and, you're kind of looking at them, and when you look at them, they happen to be, looking at you, or they seem to be looking at you, you might just assume they're listening and paying attention. And in fact, for girls who suffer from ADHD, they might be, having their eyes focused on the teacher, but their mind might be starting to wander, and the teacher might never notice them, whereas the teacher's much quicker to notice a boy who is, for example, moving around a lot and say, hey, you need to sit still. So I think whether it's a boy or a girl who is more restless, they tend to get the attention and the recognition that they might need some help focusing, whereas the daydreaming child might fall under the radar and not really get the help that the child needs.
Yeah, and another point about restlessness is it's not always physical. A lot of times it's verbal. So like I told you this, Miss Faitel, but for people who are listening, I have ADD and I had ADHD as a kid and I was never physically very active, but I talk so much during class. Like it would drive my teachers insane. But I think because we don't think of excessive talkativeness as ADHD, we just think of it as kind of being disrespectful, right? Like I don't think anyone ever considered it was ADHD.
That's an excellent point. I think that falls right along with, there's this impulsivity And when I think people think of ADHD, they think impulsiveness always as behavioral in terms of movement. And you're exactly right that the inability, and it truly is an inability to stop the flow of ideas comes so fast and furious that someone with this disorder really finds it very challenging to not say what's on their mind. I think someone told me that I have not seen the series of Anne of Green Gables. It's a modern series, and they said it's one of the earliest cases of ADHD. It's a young girl who has a very hard time kind of not talking. And I thought it was very interesting that, again, I've only seen part of one episode, but this impulsive, kind of speaking manner that where she really has a hard time stopping the flow of ideas, I thought was a good way of reminding people that that's part of ADHD as well.
I had no idea. Like, I've heard of Anne of Green Gables, but I never realized that, like, the character had ADHD.
Yeah, it's. I think there's a more modern version, a TV series, and she does talk, a lot. When she'll be very quiet, and all of a sudden the ideas come fast and furious. And I thought, okay, maybe some people might be annoyed as an audience member, but yet if you realize that she can't help it, I hope it makes people feel some sympathy for how challenging it would be to stay quiet when everything in your mind is telling you to share these ideas.
Yeah.
And the good news is, like, of course, it's very difficult, like, not to talk or not to act a certain way when you have ADHD, but, like, it's definitely treatable, like any other kind of disorder. So that kind of brings us into our next question, like, what has helped you and what hasn't with ADHD?
Well, myself, I'm very, very grateful that I have an identical twin sister. I was never officially diagnosed. She struggled a little bit more in high school with focus. I think very sympathetic teachers along the way. My twin sister and I were not usually kept in the same class because we were twins, but I think I had just teachers with a little more patience. And so my twin sister ended up being diagnosed, and I just assumed I would be as well. But after seeing what she went through after her diagnosis, it was sort of like I could benefit from the recommendations that she was given, things like staying organized. And I now I'm really a firm believer in this idea that organization is vital, but very, very challenging for anyone with ADHD. So there's small things, but I keep a weekly calendar, on my refrigerator. It's like an erasable calendar, and I, every week make sure that the important events are on it, and I enter daily tasks on my phone with alerts. And I keep certain items in the same place all the time, like my wallet, my keys, my glasses, my backpack, that they have to go in the same place. Related items are, kept close to each other. I just find that a system of organization for finding things and putting things away is vital, because it's so easy to misplace items otherwise. And then for myself, also just eating a healthy diet. I feel like when I feel better, physically, I do better. I try to walk regularly. And when I'm anxious, I think people who suffer from ADHD also experience pierced anxiety when they're easily overwhelmed by tasks. So I definitely practice slow breathing, whether it's traffic or I'm looking at a long list of things to do. And it's a silly thing, but ever since the pandemic, my neighbors and I have met outside on Friday evenings just as a social gathering. It used to be distance, but we now do that, and I like it because it forces me in some ways to clean my house, because every Friday I have this kind of visit, and sometimes I go to my neighbors, sometimes they come to my house, but it sort of forces me every week to do a quick check of like, I'm going to quickly organize things. But I think for someone with ADHD, finding a system of organization is just really, really important. And when you're a student, I think this idea of talking to your teacher and asking them to have you sit in the front so you're less distracted.
Yeah. What hasn't been helpful? Like, what would you recommend people avoid doing?
It's funny. I have heard people say that, oh, they swear by a certain app or a certain program. And I have not found this magical app that helps me because I get distracted with setting up the app, or my daughter, I noticed she'll try to use a planner in a certain way that she wants to make it kind of attractive. And in making it attractive, she gets distracted by organizing it, making it pretty, and then she doesn't remember to, use it the way it's supposed to, is to keep track of activities. So for me, my planner's pretty simple. I've gone to, here's a notebook, here's the list of things I need to do. I find that apps that are colorful, and it's interesting because some people say that really motivates them, the different colors and making it attractive, but I'm just distracted. So I find that simpler for me is better.
Oh, I see. I'm kind of like your daughter. Like, I put a lot of time into making my planner look good, but I'm also very diligent about using it.
I think that's back to the what's best for one person doesn't necessarily work for another, but kind of finding what is it that will help you stay organized, and whatever that system is, just the minute you find, wow, this helps me, then to stick with that, And yes, I guess, it really does help help you to have that planner. But I think a planner, whether you simply or decoratively, whatever it is, a planner, I think really is important in some system, whether it's on your phone or, a calendar or, booklet, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think like the organization aspect is really important.
It's interesting because, like, I have ADD and I have OCD. So you think that the two of them would cancel each other out. But I think a lot of sometimes like the excessive organization I do has been to kind of compensate for my natural forgetfulness, Like, it drives my parents crazy because on one hand, one of my goals is like to stop forgetting things. Like, like I went to my SAT center, I left my calculator. Like, every day I lose my phone somewhere. But then like another goal is for me to stop relying so much on lists, right? But I feel like the lists help me not forget things, because then every time I leave, I can check off whatever I have with me. So it gets kind of confusing sometimes, like with like what are my goals for myself?
That makes sense. It seems like I can appreciate how having the two different disorders, in some ways you sort of have to strike a balance. But I think in some ways the list, yeah, I'm sure, and maybe the idea of like restricting yourself to one list, or I mean, it must be hard though, because I could see where the list of items you bring somewhere, like if you go to a class, if there's a certain place in your plan, like a small list of the things you're bringing to class, going back, that would be helpful before you're leaving, just to make sure, oh yeah, do I have I should need an SAT book and a calculator and the pencil I brought and my phone and my purse or whatever it is. You would not want to forget those things.
Yeah. So let's shift to like the other like point of view, like as a parent, like if you're trying to help someone else who has ADHD, what should you do? And like what shouldn't you do?
It's so hard, but the number one thing I would think is to accept that certain behaviors, such as acting impulsively, whether it's verbally or racing towards the street because they want to get to the other side, or forgetting to do something, losing items, all these behaviors are not done intentionally. So I think, many times children who are diagnosed or being diagnosed with ADHD are seen as defiant, seen as disrespectful, defiant, just in so many ways, they're just distracted. So I think having patience, that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But and my daughter's lost probably, I would say, 40 water bottles along the course of, since going to school, jackets. We've lost entire backpacks, lunch bags, boxes, you name it, we've lost it. So I guess, I just had to take a breath. This year we bought a brand new lunch bag, and I thought, oh, it's really attractive. She picked out, and I thought this is great. She really likes this bag. And it was lost the third day of school. We still haven't found it. So just taking a breath and saying, okay, it's not done on purpose, saving the budget to replace items that are needed, just having a sense of humor about it, like, okay. But I think there's other things too. But to underline, the most important is finding patience, that it's not, these behaviors are not done intentionally. And then I think this idea of when you're giving directions, regardless of the age, is to give very clear directions for only 1 to 2 tasks at a time. Because I think my husband, he will give her a list of 4 things to do, and he will say it's only 4 things. She should know to do all of them. But even I can sense that after she's done the second task, she, gets distracted and doesn't do the other 2, and then he gets upset. So I would say that, hey, can you do these 2 things? Repeat after that's why another thing, a task I found is very helpful is to have my daughter repeat back what I just said. Hey, because she will literally get distracted mid-sentence. I can see her attention is fading. So I'll say, hey, can you do these 2 things? And then I'll say, wait, before you leave, what did I just say? And then she'll repeat them back. I'm like, okay, great. And then when you do those 2 tasks, you're free, or hey, can you come back to one more task? But I'll often have to remind her at that point, hey, you did the 2 tasks, you come on back. So, yeah, there's other tasks. I think that those 2, and for myself, I finally have accepted that the behavioral kind of strategies don't always work. So as a parent, if you find that you have to, it's just not working. Strategies are not working like charts. We've tried every kind of star chart you could think of. If you do the following things with less than 3 reminders, you'll get a star. If you get so many stars, you get a prize. We've tried all sorts of things like that, or try not to be impulsive. And I found that at some point in 2nd or 3rd grade, I want to say 2nd, we did finally decide, my husband and I, that medication was something we wanted to try, because I have a niece whose parents refused to give her medication. I'm not sure refused is the term, but they really did not want her to be on medication. And she shared struggling academically all the way through middle school and wishing her parents had at least tried. She thinks school would have been much easier. So I think as a parent, no matter what other people say, do what's best for you and your child. I've definitely heard my share of criticism for turning to medication, that I'm not a good mother, that I'm hurting my daughter, that I should have tried longer. But I think you just have to, do what's best for you and your child.
And at the end of the day, I feel like people will always criticize what you do, right? Especially if you're a parent. Like, I've seen that. Like, there's no right answer. People feel very strongly about how kids should be raised. And if you're not raising your kids the way that might work best for their family, they think you're doing something wrong. So, like, at that point, there's no point in caring.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, I think as parents, it's really important to separate, I guess, like, symptoms from your child, like, from your child's, like, what they want to be doing, or, like, just having that patience. I feel like it's helpful to think of their behaviors that you don't like as, oh, this is because my child is struggling with this, because they have symptoms of this. Not like my child is doing something wrong.
That is very well said. I think I think if, people take away no other message than that, I think it's easier said than done, but this idea of when a child who's struggling with ADHD does something and the parent is finding themselves losing patience or being very frustrated. Let's say, as I can share many times when my daughter worked really hard on a homework assignment or a project, and then she got to school and forgot it. And, knowing she's going to get a 0 for something she worked really hard on, it would make me so frustrated. But in the moment, I'd say, okay, there's my daughter who she didn't mean to do this. There's my daughter, and there's this behavior, and the behavior is just showing, it's the manifestation of the disorder. It's not her as a person.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that.
And there's a balance to be struck between, like, not blaming yourself for another person, not being too hard for yourself, but at the same time, like taking responsibility, right? You don't want to ever say, like, well, this is just how I am. Like, there's always things that can be done. It's hard to find the right solution. Like, for example, like making a checklist, or like I put alarms on my phones for like meetings and stuff. Otherwise I'll forget. where it's like, if I do make a mistake, I'm not like, God, you're an awful person, but I'm like, this is a learning opportunity for maybe what I can do next time to like not like make this mistake again.
That's an excellent point, right? You do have. I did tell my daughter, you have to learn from these experiences. When you do get the 0 on assignment, hopefully, what's fortunate is she's always talked to her teachers ahead of time to let them know what she struggles with. But certainly, this idea of like, hey, let's learn from this. So, what are we going to do next time? Okay, when you print out an assignment, you're going to put it in your folder right away. Put it in your backpack right away. It's a lesson learned, and then hopefully you don't make the same mistake the next time.
Yeah, and it's hard because with ADHD, like these are kind of like habits you're trying to like break and make, right? Like putting something in your bag directly after you print it. So it takes a lot of time for that habit to be built, but it's just like all about practice.
Right.
What advice would you give to like educators or like teachers when dealing with, students who struggle with ADHD?
I think the most important is if they tell you, which is wonderful, thank them for sharing it with you, and then move them to the front of the room as quickly as you can, because I think being to the front of the room just it avoids so many distractions. Automatically, they're much more likely to get be able to focus on the periods of time in which they can focus. They have the ability, a vision full of others, classmates, maybe one of whom is distracting other people inside the room. So front of the room, and then just to walk by more often if they can. I found for my daughter, the teachers who were kind enough to take the time to just tap her desk, kind of to bring her back, it made a huge difference. Luckily, she had just a couple really great teachers who were willing to do that. Others were not, but the good teachers would kind of take the time to everyone. I know there's one student I have who has said I think really struggles with homework, that he just really can't focus. So sometimes he's been coming in to see me at lunch so we can do it together. And at that time, I'll say, okay, I'll just say, okay, so here's what we do. And then, so I'll have him like say, hey, so I'm going to wait till you take out a pen or pencil, and kind of just reminding the students that, before I get started, especially elementary teachers, before they start a task, making sure the children with ADHD have their materials out, like, hey, we're about to start a task, and checking that does everyone have a pencil ready? Because we'll need it for this activity. And then to take a minute to check to make sure, because I think with an ADHD child, they would be, maybe miss out that moment when everyone's got their pencil out, and then instead of just grabbing it quickly, they're like, start to dig in the bag, and it might not be what they want, and then they've missed 5 minutes of the activity just looking for their pencil.
Yeah. That's very nice of you to like sit in during lunch and do your homework with another student, because I feel like a lot of teachers, like I feel like most teachers wouldn't do that, honestly. Like there's a wide range in how accommodating people can be, but it's difficult.
I guess what I'm hoping is that sometimes it happens where I just do it a couple times in the beginning of the year to model for the student. So I'm hoping that by sitting down and saying, hey, it's not so much work as maybe you think it is. I would hope the student can see it's maybe more manageable than he thinks it is, because he says he feels overwhelmed. But when we did it together, we were able to finish it in a lunch period. So I'm hoping that then, that will just kind of model for in the future, like, hey, you can do this. It won't take too long.
Yeah. And another point I would like to add is like, for me, like what really helps is just like your teachers being like kind and understanding. Like, I know I shared this story with you, Miss Faitel, about like my first grade teacher. And I like, it wasn't completely her fault because she didn't know I had ADHD, right? I wasn't diagnosed at the time, but like her solution to me talking and not doing my work was like making me sit with like the ELD kids and the kids who had like speech impairments and stuff during reading. And that used to like frustrate me even more because I didn't have an issue reading, right? Like I love to read. And then the passages that we were getting were like simpler than like what the rest of the kids were getting. So I would be getting like even more bored, and then every single day she put me on the red dot for like recess, which was like time out basically. So all the other kids would go out and play and I'd have to like stay on the red dot, and they positioned the red dot. It was actually kind of harsh. I felt like the red dot in James Leach, it's like you sit and you watch all the other kids play and you sit outside. And it was kind of brutal for me as a kid to have to watch everyone else and not get the time to like spend all my energy. So obviously, like, my teacher didn't know I had ADHD. She just thought I was being defiant. But just, I think, like, treating the kid with kindness and saying, it's okay, I'm here to help you, instead of punishing them and hoping that the punishment will get them to change their behavior.
That's an excellent point. I think your teacher unknowingly did the exact opposite of what she should have, because I think research studies show that many children with ADHD are quite bright and they're easily bored. So I'm not sure if bored is the right word, but I think the idea is if you're given simpler reading, you're more likely to be distracted than if they actually had given you an engaging passage or something a little more challenging that probably would have kept your interest, held your interest more, so you probably would have been better behaved. And to give you a chance to run outside with the other kids, you would have been more focused coming back in. It's just too bad. I think, teachers who notice children have to move, then maybe give them tasks or make them the person who passes out the papers, that need to be passed out, or, oh, hey, create a task. Like, oh, it's reading time. Hey, I need someone to help me pass out books, and you have a helper, and it makes, you might want to not always on that child, but in some ways find many tasks they can do that give them a reason to get out of their seat and move a bit. That will probably be much more helpful than keeping them in a place where they can't move and away from the other kids where they're punished for something that they can't even control. I think that must have been very, very, very hard on you.
It's okay. It was just first grade. But yeah, in like hindsight, I think that like if I had been diagnosed younger, like it would have been helpful for both me and my teacher.
Yeah,
but yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Just to understand it more.
I think like with any like disorder or anything, like just education is really important. Like making sure that teachers are trained in like spotting symptoms of ADHD and like how to deal with that, how to be helpful, how to use like discipline in a way that's helpful and not damaging.
Right. I think we definitely need more training as teachers. I can't think if I've ever actually had a training. It's been my own experience, but I don't think I've had a training session on how to recognize ADHD directly. And that would be really, really helpful, I think, for teachers to know that there's these behaviors that are not done intentionally to disrupt your class. They don't actually need to be disciplined. This children need some redirection and help.
Yeah, actually, I had no idea that teachers didn't receive like training for ADHD. You think that it would be included in like the college process.
And maybe it is now because I was trained a long time ago. I certainly hope so. But I know when I was trained as a teacher, I did not receive any special training in learning challenges like ADHD.
I see. Okay, is there anything else that you think would be like good to discuss, Ms. Faitel?
Oh, I guess just, if a parent suspects that their child has ADHD, whether they do or don't, I guess, get the official diagnosis is, maybe I found that reading books and doing research has been really helpful for, again, even if the child doesn't get officially diagnosed, just to sort of have a book at the ready where a behavior gets frustrating is to have this, kind of force to look back, like, what do other parents do? And at one point, I did join a support group of parents of children with ADHD, and I found that very helpful. It was just to hear other people's challenges. I didn't feel so alone, and then to hear strategies that they try. I just think that there are resources out there, but not to be afraid to grab a book and look up what you can do to help yourself and your child, and then know that there are support groups out there so you're not so alone.
Yeah, I think connection with other parents and like other members of the same community, like education, all those things can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think so too.
And we're so lucky now that like with the internet, it's so easy to find information. Like you can look at YouTube, you can look at articles, you can look at podcasts. It's very accessible now.
Exactly. I think unfortunately the mental health care, like therapy, is still very hard to access. There's just a lack of mental health care providers, but at least there are resources where you could identify what's going on and get some help with some strategies. There's definitely a wealth of information on the internet.
Okay, so thank you so much for your time, Miss Faitel, and thank you to everyone who's listening to this episode. Pranjal and I really appreciate your support, and we really hope you found this episode to be informative and helpful.